right, guys. Welcome to the Buff Show podcast number.
We don't know.
We don't know because it depends on how we release these. So,
50 something.
Yeah, 50 something.
Yeah.
So, today we're going to be covering subject to sale of buyer's property. We also have a video that's the exact reverse. But this is so if the buyer of a property has to sell theirs first before they can perform in their buy contract.
Which we run into this all the time. The sellers subject to seller finding a replacement property is like less common. This one I would say we use a lot.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I see that more often for sure.
Because in the real estate purchase contract, if you're a buyer and you're going to purchase a property, right, in the contract it says, is this contingent upon the sale of a property?
Yeah.
Why would a seller want to know if the buyer that has made an offer on their house is contingent upon the sale of another property?
If they're going to be using those funds to be able to purchase their home, they need to know that, right?
Yeah. Because if, I think it brings in a whole nother wrench into like the wheel, because then there's a whole nother contingency period, buyer, due diligence, inspection, appraisal that has to happen in order for that buyer to buy the seller's property. And I've seen these go like a few deep where it's like this buyer has to sell this house in order to buy this house, and this buyer needs to sell their house in order to buy this house. And I'm like, geez. So instead of having like a cash buyer where all they have to do is find out if they like the property, we have to find if this buyer likes that property, if this buyer likes that property.
Yeah.
You know, it just adds in all these layers. And even if it doesn't go that deep, even if it's just one deep, it adds on, I would say 50% more risk.
Chance of
it falling through, because the house has to have a clean inspection. The buyer has to be happy with it. The buyer's financing has to be good. The appraisal has to hit, and so on and so forth. So these subject to sales can be a pain in the butt if you're a buyer and you're in a competitive situation, because obviously the seller is going to want to go with the cleanest, easiest, fastest option. And this addendum basically says like, hey, if our house doesn't sell, we're out.
Yep.
You know?
Even if we're past due diligence deadline, past financing and appraisal deadline, because we have this addendum signed,
it gives them an out up until the financing and appraisal deadline. That's the latest. If it's after the financing and appraisal deadline, then you would lose. The buyer would lose their earnest money. So, but there's a few like questions in here that I feel like if you're a buyer and you have a house to sell, that you can do ahead of time to get ready, because this is kind of like a preparation game. If you're prepared, you're going to increase your odds, right? Mm-hmm. So anytime I see this come across my desk and I'm representing a seller, my first question is, well, is your house listed?
Yep.
And then if it is listed, do you have a contract on it?
Yep.
And then when does it close? So like let's run through a few scenarios, because let's say I have a house for sale, you bring me an offer and it's a great offer, but their house isn't even listed yet. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm like, okay, well, they got to go through a few weeks of getting it ready. It's probably not going to look that great because they're rushing it.
Yep.
And then they got to get it listed. They have to find a buyer, which right now you're on average 53 days before you even get an offer accepted.
Yeah.
And then you're another 30 days. So I'm like, dang, we're like
2 months.
We're 80 days out before, on average, before
we know if this thing's going to happen or not.
We know if this is going to even happen.
Yeah.
Versus if you brought me an offer and it's like, I'm like, hey, is your, in this addendum it asks, is a buyer's property listed on the MLS? Yes, okay. And if it's not listed, it has to be listed within 7 days. And then number 3 is the best thing, is the buyer's property under contract. If you're like, yeah, it's under contract and we close on Monday next week, and I'm like, oh, dang, like you're past due diligence, you're past financing and appraisal, like everybody's locked in. That, in my mind, is almost as good as like
not a big deal.
Any other offer, almost,
right?
Yeah. Because all the contingency periods have been like completed.
Yeah. If that box is checked, we can feel pretty confident bringing an offer to our seller and recommending it. I mean, obviously, it's still not a done deal, but it sure holds a much stronger argument compared to not being under contract, and definitely if it's not listed. So
Yeah.
yeah, I wouldn't try to dissuade my seller from taking an offer if there's another one already under contract.
Yeah. So let's walk through this a little bit and just explain it to people, because that's what this is for.
Yeah.
If you're looking into doing this, these are the things you need to be aware of. So as a buyer, you have the right to cancel before due diligence or financing and appraisal, whichever is later, and you just give notice, say, hey, our house hasn't sold, and you would get your earnest money back. If you cancel after that, you would lose your earnest money. It would go to the seller. So as long as your dates are far enough out, you're good there. It'll make you list the address of the property that you are trying to sell. So, Austin, if you're working with buyer and they have a house to sell, they know it, what are some maybe steps of preparation that a buyer can take
Yeah.
to, like, maybe getting ready or giving themselves the best chance to get an offer accepted in this market?
Yeah. So I actually have a couple different clients right now in that exact same situation. So what we do first is basically pretend like we are going to list their property. And that includes the full array of things. So that's little house projects. Once they're done with that, that's us staging, getting pictures done, like being 100% ready to be listed, even if they don't know where they're going to go yet.
Right.
Because once we do find out where they want to go, where they want to offer on, we'll put that house on the market on the MLS so that when we fill out the contract on that purchase, we can say, hey, yeah, we have a subject to buyer's property sale, but we are listed, and it's only a matter of time until we go under contract.
Right. And then you have like a marketing link. You can be like, hey, here's our photos. The
Yeah.
house looks great. Like
Yeah.
this house will sell super fast.
Like
Like
we're
it just,
serious.
yeah, it makes it so much easier than not having anything ready. Here's what I see happen. Like we'll be working with buyers. Yeah, we have a house to sell, and I'll tell them like, hey, it's probably a good idea to get, it ready, like get, have some urgency there.
Mm-hmm.
And 99 times out of 10, yeah, it's a good idea. And then
Yes.
nothing happens. And
That's so
then
true.
I get a text or a call, and they're like, oh my gosh, hey, this house next to my grandma, it came up, and like it's our dream house. We have to have it. We got to get our house sold. We got to get an offering.
Right.
And I'm just like, oh my gosh, you just made this way harder. And like this, so then they're like, let's write an offer. I'm like, great. And then we have 7 days to get your house on the market. And it's just like working backwards when if you would just take a few steps forward and like look into the future and be like, hey, we are going to sell within the next year or 18 months. Like, I don't think that's too far to get like the right pictures, to get everything looking ready. And then you're at least ready to go.
Yeah.
If you need to.
Especially depending on what repairs need to be made.
Right.
Like a year, it might be necessary to redo the deck or whatever.
Well, I think another conversation that we should have is like, it depends on what the buyer's looking for. Like if they're looking for a unicorn, and like these homes only hit the market like once or twice a year, you should be ready, because there is the other addendum that we can use, subject to seller finding a replacement property, and that works great if that seller knows exactly what they want, and there's like the home's kind of a dime a dozen. Like there's a lot of them, say a home in Ogden that is newer than 2000, has a 2-bed, 3-bath on a quarter acre, under 600,000. Be like, yeah, for sure we can find you something. There's, 10 properties a month that come up that fit those parameters. If they're confident that that's the case, then I would say you could use the subject to seller finding a replacement property, because probably most likely within a few weeks you could find something. But if you're a buyer who's like, oh, I need a house in Mountain Green on 2 acres and it needs to be under $1 million, it's like, that's tough. But they do come up, right? We've sold those. Yeah. And it's just like you're limited to maybe 3 or 4 of those a year, and they're pretty competitive. So getting everything in order so that when that does come up, that you can be like, hey, we are subject to sell, but our marketing's done, it's staged, like everything's done. Here's a link. Yeah. I think the sellers will be like, okay, like these guys aren't playing around. And then if you wanted to make it more aggressive, you could put down some non-refundable earnest money or something to entice them more and kind of buy more time if you needed it. But just be ready is our
Yeah.
biggest thing, because I think all too often it's the reverse where they're like, found the house, and then they're just like trying to get it ready, getting bad pictures, bad
Yeah.
marketing, and we're just doing the best we can with the time that we have, and then you about see some marriages end
Right.
over
I
that
know.
process. So it doesn't have to be that way. Um, I think preparation
Yeah.
is key. So
Help us help you.
exactly.
If you're doing the buy sell combo, pretend like you are going to list it like next week.
Yeah.
Let's go through all those steps
Yeah.
and then do everything but hit the enter button
Right.
on the MLS.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're seriously looking within a month or a year to 18 months, I think it's not a
Yeah.
bad idea to have that done. We're ready. We have everything ready. And then say you wait 8 months and then now you're looking at selling in the fall, and you were originally looking at selling in the spring. Like that's an even better time. Then you have spring photos, spring
Mhm.
marketing, and fall marketing on your
Yeah.
home. We can update it. Like it just gives you a better chance
Yeah.
for success when the time does come. And we're ready. Like we're willing to help. Like
Yeah.
we'll front a lot of the costs and help you get ready for that. And then we're just like on speed dial, ready to go.
I was gonna say we rather pay for new pictures with our own money
Yeah.
than have like 1 week to get your
Oh,
house, like hands down.
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So we will pay for the new pictures if they're outdated by the time you actually need to sell.
Yeah. No, 100%. Anything else that you wanted to bring to light on this subject to sell a buyer's property?
Not really, other than like we do these all the time. I did one for my sister's house and it worked out just fine. So if you're a seller and you get an offer with one of these, I wouldn't necessarily write it off right away, or be down. I just again like we did a pretty thorough job of reviewing the cons
Mhm.
for the sellers. So now they know. But I would say just give it a chance. Look at all the details first.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is definitely not an uncommon situation, but playing your cards right and having everything ready is key to making these work well. Whether you're, the buyer doing a subject to sell of your, house you live in, which is a lot of buyers. If you're a seller selling a house and you have a buyer with one of these on there, let's talk about if you're a seller and you see one of these. What are some things to look out for?
Um, it's kind of interesting because you're almost not going under contract with just those people. You're almost going under contract with your buyer's buyers. Like you don't really get to know who they are or know anything about their circumstance, but what they do completely affects what you and your buyers do.
Yeah, which brings to mind another addendum we need to do a
Oh,
video on,
oh,
time clause.
oh yeah, time clause, yeah.
Because this is what happens. Like if you're the opposite and put yourself in the seller's shoes, like this is a good perspective to have. You're a seller, you get one of these, and if their property's not even on the market and we're in a market like we are in now, I would advise my client either one, not take it. Like just
Mhm.
because what's the point of like tying up your property, doing all these steps when you know the
Right.
buyer likes the house? Like just wait for them to go under contract,
Yeah,
right? They're
yeah,
likely not going to go anywhere. But if you wanted to tie up your property, you could do what's called a time clause, and we need to shoot another video on that. But basically, the time clause is it allows the seller an out, like similar to the subject to seller finding replacement property. It's the seller saying, "Hey, we'll work with you, buyer. You have a subject to sell, but we reserve the right to continue to market the property. And if we receive another offer, you have X amount of days, hours, whatever it's agreed upon to remove due diligence, financing and appraisal, or whatever contingencies are on in the
hmm
offer." And so it gives the sellers a right to still market and solicit for other offers. And if they get a better one, they can go back to the buyer and be like, hey, remove due diligence, financing, and appraisal. subject to sell, and we'll proceed with your offer. Basically, make your earnest money
Yeah.
non-refundable, or we're going to go with this other offer.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of different cases that you can use the time clause on. It's not just subject to sell, but that's something that you might see as a buyer or could use as a seller to kind of mitigate the risk
Mm-hmm.
if you're a seller on the subject to sell addendum.
Yeah.
So we'll have to do another video on that. But it's funny, you don't think of all the nitty gritty details to all this. And then there's the whole thing of like if you're selling your house and you're buying a house, making sure your dates are staggered and protecting yourself so that if your buyer backs out on the house that you're selling, you still can get out on the house that you're buying and not lose earnest money.
Yep.
And if you do lose earnest money, that it's more than enough to cover the difference in liquidated damages and all
Yeah.
that. So
It's definitely like a chess game.
yeah,
Like we do this every day, and like I still have to take a step back and be like, okay, now how are dates gonna work or
Right.
earnest money? Could you imagine trying to navigate all this as just a for sale by owner, just like a buyer
No.
unrepresented,
no.
and you've only bought like one
Few
other
times.
house maybe
Well,
or two?
And the
That'd be
crazy,
hard.
it is like it's like, and that's a nice thing about having like a good agent and somebody that's done this a lot is we talk to, like, we're not just doing this on our own. We're talking
That's
to other
true.
people being like, hey, like I have this situation. How would you set this
Yeah.
up? What's the best way? Can you look this over and make sure
Yeah.
we're good? So we're getting other feedback and advice as well because every situation's so different. How you set it up matters, right?
Yeah.
And I see people make mistakes on these all the time. They're like, "Oh crap, didn't really think that went through," and it's easy to overlook. There's a lot of moving parts to these, so don't try and do it on your own. There's
Yeah.
definitely smart ways to set these up and to get them done. So, and we've had a lot of experience in that. So if you have more questions on the subject to sell, it's a great addendum. We have to use it, and there's a lot of people that do use it.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to set it up right. So,
Yeah.
okay, guys, we'll reach out if you have any other questions. And until next time.